The great thing about Australian history is the fact that the nation believes that history begins every morning. It's as if there is no past and no past. And that's the great thing about it. I'm not just talking about First Nations history, which was for a long time ignored. Obviously, we've seen a greater acknowledgement of the colonisation process and the continuing negative legacy on First Nations people in this country. Although, interestingly, many people still believe that it didn't happen. That somehow the colonisation process was nothing more than a walk in the park. That's the first thing we need to remember. But the important thing about Australian history is that we seem to forget that everything which we enjoy as citizens and permanent residents in this country is directly linked to the struggles of millions of people. That's right, millions of people who in many instances have sacrificed their lives to ensure that we continue to experience these benefits. And that's what I mean by historical amnesia. Let's go through a few important historical amnesia episodes. Now, one I like to talk about is what happened post-Federation. Two pieces of legislation were the first pieces of legislation which went through the federal parliament. The first piece was the White Australia policy. Because at that particular point in time in our history, it was felt that the way forward is to maintain the integrity of the white race. Now, obviously, most people have forgotten or ignored that this country had a black history. They've forgotten. But that's a different story. The next piece of legislation is quite fascinating because it gives you an insight into a lot of the thinking in 2026 with the growth of the divided nation movement and their hanger-oners. The next piece of legislation was the Kanak Deportation Act. And the Kanak Deportation Act was about expelling people who would work as labourers on the sugarcane fields and the farms, mainly in Queensland and northern New South Wales, back to the Pacific Islands from which they had come from. And over 20,000 were deported. The interesting thing is that the New South Wales government at that particular point in time realised the importance of Kanak labour, and if Kanaks could find themselves in northern New South Wales from Queensland, they didn't face deportation. And many of the communities now in northern New South Wales have Kanak heritage and they've made an important contribution to Australian life. So these two pieces of legislation we never talk about. Obviously, the White Australia policy began to crumble after the spectre of the Japanese imperial forces invading and successfully colonising Australia after World War II. Now, interestingly, I'll go back a step or two. The debate around the 26th of January, whether it should be the Australian National Day, is quite fascinating. Now, I am sure most of the people who support continuing to use the 26th of January as this country's national day will be aghast if the Japanese imperial forces had successfully invaded Australia and the day on which that colonisation process began was celebrated as Australia Day. So I find it difficult to understand how the same people cannot recognise that First Nations people objection to the 26th of January being a national day. But that's something, we're all familiar with. Now the next interesting historical amnesic period is World War I. Now let's not forget the population of Australia during World War I was around 5 million. The White Australia policy had ensured that apart from North Queensland and Northern Territory and Northern Western Australia, that this country was overwhelmingly European. The declaration of war in August 1914 by the British Empire against the German Empire saw feverish activity in this country when the Prime Minister at that time, Mr. Fisher, claimed that we would fight with the British Empire to the last man and the last shilling. And during World War I, when we celebrate or commemorate, not celebrate, commemorate Australia's participation in world wars, World War I is the history regarding surrounding World War I is forgotten. Although 420,000 young men volunteered to fight for the British Empire, and 62,000 died on the European killing fields, more than have died in any war, in every single war Australia's participated in since over 100 years. And another 60,000 died of their war wounds within 12 months of returning to this country. And the social dislocation which occurred in small communities across the country, when a significant proportion of the young men had died or were incapacitated. But we're told over and over again that World War I was a war which was conducted for freedom, liberty, freedom of speech, etc. Ultimately, World War I was nothing more than a dirty little trade war which resulted in the deaths of over 25 million people, which was fought by workers at either end of the bayonet for the glory of God, King and country. Let's not forget that most of the so-called royal, in inverted commas, families that are involved in World War I, whether it was the Germans, whether it was the Russians, whether it was the English, were basically related. Queen Victoria made sure of that by farming out her multiple daughters to royal houses, in inverted commas, around the state. So we've got this historical amnesia regarding World War I. Now, although there are monuments in every little hamlet and town and suburb in this country regarding World War I, there are no public monuments to what I consider to be the greatest people who saved the most lives during World War I, and that was the anti-conscription movement. The anti-conscription movement was so powerful amongst trade unionists, Roman Catholics, women, that they split the Labor Party, and a third of the Labor Party crossed the floor and joined the Conservative Nationals, and in an attempt to increase the number of men to be sacrificed in the European killing fields for the glory of God, King and country, the Prime Minister held two plebiscites, one in December 1916 and one at the end of 1917, to try to introduce conscription in the country. And after a vigorous campaign which saw the destruction of the industrial workers of the world, which led the struggle against conscription, we saw both conscription plebiscites defeated. Now, the only monument I know regarding this huge struggle which has been written out of the pages of the Australian history books are actually indoors, at the Melbourne Trades Hall at the corner of Lygon Street and Victoria Street on the Lygon Street entrance, and it's worthwhile a visit. So let's move on. Now, World War II was a defining moment for this country, and it wasn't until Paul Keating in the 1990s raised the importance of the resistance to the Japanese invasion in Papua New Guinea by the Chocos. Because what had happened at the beginning of World War II, when we had a Conservative Menzies government in power, Pig Iron Bob's government, which was sending iron ore to the Japanese right up till 1938, although they were involved in this vicious genocidal wars in Korea and China. And let's not forget, it was the Waterside Workers of Australia which put bans on the export of iron ore to Japan in 1938. Now, people talk about what happened at the beginning is most of Australians' troops were sent to Libya, to Palestine, to fight Rommel's German armed corps. And when the Japanese launched their surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, what happened is that there was nobody here to defend Australia. Now, conscription had been introduced in Australia in World War II, and the young boys, 18 to 20, which were sent to meet the hardened Japanese imperial forces which had gone right through Asia to Australia's north, were described as chocos. They would melt in the sun. And these chocos were able to hold back and eventually drive back the Japanese with assistance of more hardened troops when they arrived back from Africa, North Africa. So there are a lot of myths surrounding World War II and World War I, which we don't acknowledge. Now, acknowledging myths doesn't mean that somehow you support those myths, but what it does is if you acknowledge a myth, it gives it some reality. Now, something I'm really interested in is the development of the trade union movement in this country. And let's not forget, I've spoken about poor James Strater, a convict. Poor old James Strater was charged with the heinous crime in 1824 of encouraging his master servants to combine in order to oblige him, not force him, but oblige him to increase their rations and pay. And for his heinous crime against MacArthur, the Merino boy, MacArthur, he was sentenced to 500 lashes, and if he survived 500 lashes in one sitting, he was to spend a month in solitary confinement with bread and water, and then he was to serve out the rest of his sentence in a penal colony, which basically meant a death sentence for James Strater. Now, he was a great hero. Who knows about James Strater? How about all the other people involved in establishing unions, whether labour unions or trade unions, who used their industrial muscle, their power at the point of production, to force governments to introduce legislation to improve the lives of everyday people. Let's not forget the anti-conscription movement in the 1960s and 1970s in this country, which fought against the conscription of young men to be sent to die, and over 526 did die in Vietnam, to support the imperial ambitions of the United States of America. Do you ever hear about them? No. How about the Whitlam-led Labor government? We've just gone past the 50th anniversary of the Whitlam-led Labor government, which was described as the worst government in Australia's history, even during the 50th anniversary celebrations. The fact is, it was the most radical government during Australia's history. It was about redistributing wealth. It introduced over 250 pieces of legislation, reform legislation, in the space of 4 years. More reforms than have been introduced since the beginning of federation in 1901. And we see the distortion of history. And then during the Howard regime, we saw some of the most disgusting distortions of history. There was a whole movement which tried to deny, a whole political movement, ideologically bent, attempting to deny the atrocities and barbarity of the colonisation process in this country. Today, we have reached a situation where Parliament has become nothing more than a rubber stamp for that small section of society that owns the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication. And we see more and more and more Australians thinking, believing that the problem is the other, the refugee, the migrant, the person with a different religious belief, different colour, different language, and the list goes on and on. And they're organising in their tens of thousands, joining Divided Nation in order to take back the country. Take back the country for whom? For that small section of society that owns the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication. We see the deep friendship between One Nation and mining magnates in this country, including Gina Reinhardt. We see the push to rewrite history, to deny historical precedent. And why is this important? It's important ultimately. Everything you enjoy today, whether it's access to public health care, access to public education, access to a pharmaceutical benefits scheme, access to holiday pay and possibly holiday leave, access to overtime payments, access to safety concerns on workplaces, access to childcare, and the list goes on and on. And these steps forward haven't occurred because of the largesse of employers or governments or corporations. They have occurred because people have applied pressure on institutions, governments, corporations to ensure that the commonwealth is used for the common good, not to maximise the profits of a shrinking minority. And that's the situation we face in 2026. A country that denies its history, that fabricates its history to suit current political objectives, is a country that will never look after the interests of its people.